My daughter-in-law dumped me in a nursing home. She had no clue I owned the whole place. I remember the moment I realized something wasn't right. Karen, my daughter-in-law, stood in the hallway of my house, arms crossed, lips stretched into a fake smile, saying things like, "It's just until you get your strength back, Barbara. A few weeks, maybe a month." My son Michael barely looked me in the eye. He kept pacing, mumbling about work stress and how this would be good for everyone but me. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. They told me I needed rest, that I was too fragile after my fall in the kitchen. I'd slipped on water, nothing serious. Bruised hip, that's all. I had a walker. I had a part-time nurse coming twice a week. I was managing just fine. But Karen insisted that my safety was more important than my independence. I should have known better when she handed me a pen and a clipboard and said, "It's just consent for short-term admission." She didn't even let me read it. I was confused, exhausted, and to be honest, a little afraid. I signed it. The next morning, they had packed my clothes in 2 suitcases and told me the car would be there by 10. Karen hugged me like she was being filmed for a commercial, kissed my cheek and whispered, "You'll thank us later." I didn't respond. I was too busy trying to figure out how the house I'd paid for, lived in for 43 years, had suddenly stopped being mine. The car didn't go to a hospital. It didn't go to rehab. It pulled up in front of Clearwater Grove Assisted Living Center. I knew the place. Quiet, expensive, tidy lawns, fountains in the garden. I'd passed it a dozen times while driving to the pharmacy. I never imagined I'd be living there. When the orderly wheeled me in, I felt numb. They took my purse, said they'd keep it safe. A nurse named Carla helped me into my room, smiled politely, and said, "Welcome home." That's when it hit me. Home. Not a visit. Not temporary. Home. For the next few days, I waited for Michael to call, for Karen to stop by, for someone to explain. Nothing. The staff treated me kindly, but distant. No one seemed surprised that an elderly woman had been dropped off and left. My neighbor in the room next to mine, Dolores, said this happens more often than you'd think. She probably just wanted the house, Dolores muttered, pushing her walker toward the garden. Karen always had a sharp eye for real estate opportunities. A few years ago, when my husband Don passed away, she started asking questions about the deed, the taxes, the garage space. I brushed it off. I thought she was just trying to help. On my 4th day at Clearwater Grove, I asked Carla if I could call my son. She looked nervous, said she'd check with administration. That was a red flag. Check with who? I wasn't a prisoner. Later that evening, the director came by. A man named Stephen Bishop. He was polite, professional, but clearly used to this routine. "Mrs. Randall," he said, "you've been admitted under a care agreement signed by your next of kin. The documents authorize Clearwater Grove to serve as your full-time residence and oversee all medical decisions. It's quite comprehensive." I sat frozen. I didn't agree to that. He gave a practiced smile. "I understand. This is a lot to process, but legally, everything is in order." I asked him to show me the documents. There it was. My signature. Same date, same pen. But someone had attached new pages. Things I hadn't seen. Rights waived, decision-making delegated, duration marked as indefinite. I stared at my name, thinking, how did this happen to me? The truth is, I had gotten comfortable. I had trusted too much. I thought Michael would never let something like this happen, but he didn't even answer when I called. From the front desk. The receptionist left a message on his voicemail. He never called back. The 5th day, I stopped pretending. I asked Stephen Bishop who owned Clearwater Grove. He looked confused, said it was managed by a healthcare holding company based out of Chicago. I nodded and said, "Can I see the shareholder?" "Register." That got his attention, because what no one knew, what even Karen didn't know, was that 22 years ago, Don and I had invested in a healthcare property group, back when we had money and no one listened to older people who still read financial pages. The group had grown, diversified, and when Don passed, I inherited his shares. I never sold them. Just forgot about them. Or so I thought. I called an old contact at the law firm that handled the holdings, asked her to pull the current records. 3 hours later, she called back. Her voice was flat. "Barbara," she said, "you are the majority shareholder in the parent company that owns Clearwater Grove." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the white wall of my room. The sun was setting through the blinds. "Would you like to activate your rights?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Starting now." The next day, I requested a meeting with Stephen Bishop and the facilities management team. I was polite. I smiled. I didn't mention the shares. I just asked a lot of questions. Who had access to resident files? How are incoming patients vetted? What protocols exist for reviewing legal documents upon intake? Stephen gave the same kind of careful, defensive answers I used to hear at school board meetings. I didn't argue. I nodded and took notes. That night, I called my lawyer again. "Let's prepare to assume operational oversight," I told her. "There's something about being underestimated that makes you sharper." For 5 days, I had been treated like a burden, like a confused old woman they could hide away. Karen thought she had buried me. She had no idea she'd just locked herself out of something she would never get back. And I wasn't done yet. Stephen Bishop had no idea what hit him. I wasn't confrontational. I didn't storm into his office or make a public scene. That's not how I do things. I had been quiet for most of my life. It's how people underestimated me. And now, that was my advantage. The day after I got confirmation that I was the majority shareholder of the company that owned Clearwater Grove, I started doing what Karen never imagined I'd do. I started working. I asked for a copy of the facility's annual financial report. Stephen said that information was private. I smiled and said, "Not for me." I gave him a folder with a copy of my shareholder statement and a notarized letter from my attorney. I wish I could have taken a picture of his face. He read the letter, in silence, then looked up at me, blinking fast. "You're Barbara Randall from Broadstone Equity?" "I am." His hands trembled slightly as he handed the folder back. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Because I wanted to see how you treat the women who live here," I said. "When you think they don't matter." I left his office without another word. That afternoon, I was moved from the general care wing to one of the private suites on the top floor. Suddenly, there were fresh flowers in my room. The food changed. I was now getting the same meals they served to the board when they visited. Funny how things shift when you stop playing the role they gave you. The next few days were quiet on the surface, but I was taking notes on everything. The staff schedules, the resident complaints, the way Carla, the nurse who'd helped me on my first day, never got a break between shifts. The way Dolores's roommate hadn't had her medication refilled in 2 days. Clearwater Grove was beautiful on the outside, but underneath, it was a machine that worked only when no one asked questions. So I started asking. I asked Carla how many residents were being dropped off by family and never visited again. She hesitated, then said, "More than I can count, Mrs. Randall." When she said my name now, it had a different tone. There was respect in it, not fear, not pity. One evening, I sat in the garden with Dolores and a woman named Ruth. Ruth had been a librarian in Chicago, smart as a whip. She told me her daughter just needed a break and had promised to visit after the holidays. That had been 19 months ago. Ruth didn't cry. She just stared at the lilies near the fountain and said, "We always think they'll remember who we were to them, but sometimes they only see what we cost." That line stayed with me. I started looking at Clearwater Grove differently, not just as a place where I'd been dumped, but as a place where so many women were quietly erased, pushed aside, sedated, managed. That's when the idea started forming in my head. What if this place could be more? What if it could be what our children were supposed to be? A home, a place of dignity. I reached out to Broadstone Equity's board through my lawyer, asked for a full operational audit. told them I wanted to initiate a shift in strategy, to refocus on ethical elder care and reinvest profits into programs for abandoned seniors. They were hesitant at first. The board didn't like surprises, but when they saw the numbers, they came around. The center had margins strong enough to fund the change. Still, I didn't want to make moves too fast. I needed to keep Karen and Michael in the dark. I knew they were still enjoying the house I paid for. I hadn't heard a word from either of them since they left me here. Not a call, not a card. I asked Carla to check with the front desk. They had received no messages, no mail, nothing from my family. They had already erased me, but I was going to make sure they'd feel my presence again, on my terms. 2 weeks after I took operational control, I reviewed the home's legal intake process. That's when I found it. The document Karen had brought in marked power of attorney, supposedly signed by me. I never signed that paper. And the signature? It was a poor copy of mine. Not even close. I had it flagged and submitted for legal review. In parallel, I had my lawyer initiate a review of the property title for the house. Surprise! My name was still on the deed. Karen and Michael hadn't transferred anything. They were living there like it was theirs. But legally, they had nothing. I took a breath and decided to wait. I wanted to do this right. I had a new plan. Invited Karen and Michael to Clearwater Grove under the pretense of a medical update. Carla called them personally, said the doctor wanted to meet with them. She told me Karen seemed annoyed and asked if this could be done over email. Carla said, "It's urgent." That got them. The day they arrived, I sat in the executive office, reviewing resident files. I watched them through the security camera as they walked through the front doors. Karen wore a beige trench coat and carried a designer bag. Probably bought with my retirement checks. Michael looked tired, thinner than before, like he hadn't slept well in days. Maybe guilt does that to a person. I didn't go out to greet them. I made them wait in the lobby. I told Stephen Bishop to bring them to me in the boardroom. 10 minutes later, the door opened, and they walked in, both looking confused. Karen's face went pale when she saw me sitting at the head of the long table, a folder in front of me, pen in hand. Michael said, "Mom." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence do its job. Then I said, "Take a seat." They obeyed. I slid the folder across the table. "You submitted a fraudulent power of attorney and tried to sign me away like a used car." Karen scoffed. "That's not what happened. Be quiet," I said. Michael started to speak, but I raised my hand. "You left me here to rot. You moved into my house. You didn't visit. You didn't even check if I was alive. Mom, we thought—" "No, Michael, you didn't think. You followed her lead like always. And now, you've lost everything." I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden. I've assumed full control of Clearwater Grove. I've already contacted the Attorney General's office about the forgery. I've also initiated eviction proceedings. "You'll be out of my house in 7 days." Karen jumped up. "You can't do that." I turned slowly. "I already have." And then I left the room. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. They had taken everything they thought I had. But they never took my mind, my name, or my strength. And now I had all of it back. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't go home right away after I evicted them. Knew Karen would fight it, not with lawyers, she was too cheap for that, but with guilt and manipulation. She always preferred emotional warfare to legal avenues. It gave her more control. But this time she had none. The legal paperwork had been filed. My lawyer, Cynthia Marks, handled the whole thing efficiently. 7 business days. That's all they had before they had to vacate the property. My house. The one I had worked for decades to pay off. The one they moved into like it was some kind of reward for their cruelty. That afternoon, I returned to my room at Clearwater Grove. It still amazed me how much had changed in just a few weeks. The staff knocked before entering now. My linens were changed daily. I was offered a menu at lunch. Not a tray, a menu. Funny, when you have power, people suddenly remember you're human. Carla stopped by with my evening medication and sat on the edge of the armchair. They didn't take it well, did they? She asked quietly. No, I said, sipping my tea. But they'll be out. I made sure of that. She nodded. You know, some of us here. We talk about what you're doing. It gives people hope. Mrs. Randall. Call me Barbara, I said. And thank you. But I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. Carla smiled faintly. It can be both. That night, I opened the envelope Cynthia had left with me, the one with the inspection report of the house. I hadn't been back there in over 2 years. It was supposed to be temporary. Karen said she and Michael just needed a place to stay while their condo was renovated. 2 years later, they still hadn't moved out. The report was 10 pages long, carpet stained, bathroom mirror cracked, backyard unmaintained. My garden, the one I'd spent years cultivating, had been replaced with gravel and fake turf. Karen had always hated getting her shoes dirty. There were photos, too. One of the dining room, where my antique cabinet had been replaced by a modern bar cart. One of my bedroom, now their media room, complete with a recliner and mounted television. My wedding picture? Gone. The crocheted throw I kept at the foot of the bed? Gone. They hadn't just taken the house, they had erased me from it, and that was the part that made my stomach turn. The next morning, Cynthia called. They received the notice. Karen called me 5 times. She left 3 voicemails and a very colorful email. Let me guess, I said. She's confused, shocked, hurt. All of the above, but they're packing. I didn't reply. Barbara, she added gently, you're allowed to feel something about this. I did. I just didn't know what. Anger, satisfaction, grief? Maybe all 3. A few days later, I received a visit from Stephen Bishop. The man couldn't look me in the eye for more than 2 seconds now. Mrs. Randall, Barbara, I wanted to inform you that the board approved your recommendations for restructuring the activities program, and also the new wellness center. It's moving forward. Good, I said. And the staff raises? Being finalized next week. You've made quite the impression. I nodded. That's what happens when people listen. He tried to laugh politely, but I let the silence hang. As he left, Carla poked her head in. Visitor for you? I blinked. Who? Your grandson. I hadn't seen Ben in nearly 8 months. When he walked into the room, taller and thinner than I remembered, I almost didn't recognize him. He held a coffee in one hand and a plastic bag in the other. Grandma, he said softly. I stared at him. Did your mother send you? He hesitated. She doesn't know I'm here. I motioned to the chair across from me. He sat. I just wanted to see how you were, he said. I heard. Well, everything. You heard I'm taking my house back and exposing your parents for what they did? He looked down. Yeah. And you're here because? He pulled a book from the bag. It was an old photo album, the one I thought was lost. I found this in the garage, in a box marked Donate. I thought maybe you'd want it. I took it slowly. My fingers brushed over the worn cover. Inside, there were pictures of Michael as a child, me holding him in the hospital, his first. Christmas, him and Ben in the backyard. They were going to throw this away? I asked, my voice tight. He nodded. Mom said it was clutter. I felt the ache deep in my chest. I raised him better than this. I know, Ben said. That's why I came. I just wanted you to know, I'm not like them. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Before he left, he stood by the door for a moment. Grandma, when all this is over, can I still visit? You? I looked at him, really looked, and saw something his parents had buried. Decency. Yes, I said, but only if you bring coffee next time. He smiled, and just like that, a crack of light slipped through the wall that Karen had tried so hard to build around me. But it wasn't over yet, because the day they moved out, the 7th day exactly, Karen called me directly, and what she said made me realize she wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. Karen never called me before unless she needed something. So when my phone rang at 9:12 a.m. on a Thursday, the exact morning they were court-ordered to vacate my house, and I saw her name on the screen. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. Then another. By the third one, curiosity got the better of me. I played it through my Bluetooth speaker while organizing my paperwork. Her voice came through, cold and shaking. "Barbara, I hope you're proud of yourself. You've ruined your son's life. You've ruined mine. We're standing outside your precious house with our things in a truck, and you're sitting in that nursing home acting like a queen. You think this is justice? It's abuse. Elder abuse, even. We're contacting a lawyer. We're not letting you get away with this." I paused the message. Elder abuse? That was rich, coming from the woman who locked me away and stripped my independence like it was a casual errand. The next voicemail had Michael's voice. "Mom, we didn't want it to come to this. Karen's upset. I'm upset. Please, just call me. We can figure this out." That one hit differently. Not because of guilt, but because of the tone. It wasn't a request. It was desperation hidden under civility. Michael knew he had lost control, and he didn't know what I would do. Next, I didn't call back. Instead, I called Cynthia. "They're trying to accuse me of elder abuse," I told her. There was a long pause. "On what grounds?" "They say I'm weaponizing my position as a shareholder to retaliate against my family. They're trying to paint this like I've gone mentally unstable and vindictive. Are you worried?" "No," I said. "I'm furious." Cynthia responded exactly the way I hoped she would. "Then let's go on offense." That afternoon, we submitted a cease and desist letter against both Karen and Michael. The terms were simple: any more slander or baseless legal threats, and we would countersue for defamation, fraud, and elder coercion. 2 hours later, Karen posted on Facebook. She wrote, "Some people get old and lose their minds. Some people become so bitter and lonely that they destroy the only family they have left. My mother-in-law evicted us from the home we lived in for years without warning. Now we're living out of boxes. This is what happens when seniors have unchecked power." I stared at the screen. She was trying to turn the narrative around, painting me as some cruel, delusional tyrant who abandoned her own son and daughter-in-law. Except the comments weren't what she expected. One of her college friends replied, "Didn't she own that house? How is it eviction if she just took back what's hers?" Another wrote, "This sounds like something you should have talked about privately, Karen." By the end of the day, she had deleted the post. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following Saturday, Carla knocked gently on my door. "Mrs. Randall, I need to show you something." She handed me her phone. A TikTok video was playing. A woman, Karen, with perfect makeup, sitting in her car, fake tears in her eyes. "This is the hardest video I've ever made," she began. "But I feel like the truth needs to come out." I watched, stunned, as she delivered a full 3-minute monologue about how she and her husband had sacrificed everything to care for his mother. How I had suddenly snapped and ripped away their home with no warning. How I was mentally declining and being manipulated by new staff at a luxury care facility. Carla looked horrified. "People are commenting awful things. They're saying she's a saint for putting up with you, that we're probably filling your head with lies." My hand shook as I handed the phone back. "Let them say it," I muttered. But inside, I burned. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying that video in my head, over and over. The smug tone, the fake tremble in her voice, the crocodile tears. She wanted sympathy. She wanted to rewrite the truth, and I wasn't going to let her. The next morning, I asked Cynthia to meet me in person. When she arrived, I placed a thick file on the table. "This is every document Karen and Michael had me sign, including the one they used to admit me here. I want every one of them reviewed. I want them on record." Cynthia opened the file. "And the video? Get it taken down, or flagged for defamation." I also gave her access to something I had never shared before. The shareholder meeting minutes from Broadstone Equity that confirmed my current authority, not just as a passive investor, but as a voting executive in the group's leadership rotation. If Karen wanted a war, I would give her one. But it would be quiet, strategic, and legal. While Cynthia worked on the legal front, I started working inside Clearwater Grove. I hosted my first resident town hall. It wasn't anything fancy, just a few folding chairs, a microphone, some lemon. Cookies Carla brought in from her own kitchen. But it was enough. 27 residents showed up, and one by one they shared their stories. "I haven't seen my son in 4 years," one woman said. "My daughter only calls when she needs money," said another. "I was placed here by my niece," a man whispered. "She said it was temporary. That was 7 years ago." I didn't interrupt. I just listened, and when it was over, I stood up and said, "Starting next week, we're launching a new program. It's called Second Voice. Every resident who wants to tell their story will be heard. We'll document them, record them, and if you want, we'll share them, anonymously or not." Some looked surprised, some looked scared, but one woman clapped, then another, and within minutes, everyone in the room was on their feet. I had taken control of a facility that once imprisoned me. Now I was turning it into something that could never be used against women like me again. That night, Karen sent me a message directly. It wasn't a voicemail. It wasn't a post. It was a photo. My front porch, her and Michael sitting on the swing, 2 wine glasses on the table, smiling, no caption. I stared at it for 10 seconds, then deleted it, because they didn't know something crucial while they were busy trying to win online. I was about to win something real. The nursing home had quiet hours. Technically. But at 10:43 p.m. on a rainy Wednesday, I was still awake, sitting in the staff lounge with Carla, watching her sort invoices and patient intake sheets while I sipped decaf from a chipped mug. I had just told her about Karen's latest TikTok, the one where she called me a dangerous narcissist with financial power. She'd used those exact words. Carla didn't even blink. "They always find new ways to insult women when we stop doing what they want," she muttered, scribbling a note. Then she added, "By the way, I think you should see something. Come. With me." She stood up, keys in hand, and I followed her down a hallway I hadn't paid attention to before. It wasn't on the typical resident routes. No cheery photos, no motivational posters. Just beige walls, cold air, and silence. Carla stopped at a locked door labeled simply C-Wing, Admin Hold. "I shouldn't be showing you this," she whispered. "But since you technically own the place..." She opened the door. Inside there were 3 small rooms. No windows. Just medical beds with restraints folded neatly on the sides, cameras mounted in the corners, and a chemical smell that immediately made my stomach turn. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked in and looked around, my skin crawling. The sheets were clean. The lights worked. But it didn't feel like any part of Clearwater Grove I'd known. "Do we use these?" I asked quietly. "Not since you took over." Carla crossed her arms. "They were used under the last director. For residents with behavioral challenges. Karen had your power of attorney back then. So, yeah." I couldn't breathe. "You're telling me they locked people in here?" "People like you," she said, "before you regained your legal rights." I sat on the edge of one of the beds, trying not to shake. "How many?" I asked. 6, Carla said, "all in 2020 and 2021. Only 2 are still alive. One died of dehydration. Another had a fall and wasn't found for hours. It got buried in paperwork. And the worst part? Nobody looked into it. Because they were old. Because their families didn't ask questions. Or didn't care. I didn't respond. Because I had been one of them. Maybe not locked in this exact room, but mentally, emotionally, I had been locked away. And if Carla hadn't pushed a folder across the desk that day, maybe I would have ended up in here too. I stood and looked up at the camera. "Is it recording?" She shook her head. "Disabled a year ago." "Turn it on," I said. "I want everything in here documented." She didn't argue. The next day, I brought Cynthia into that room, then the board, then a compliance inspector. Within 72 hours, those rooms were sealed permanently. Reports were filed. An investigation opened into historical patient abuse under Karen's interim management. That's when things escalated. Karen sent an official legal threat claiming I was waging a vendetta using corporate resources. Michael backed it up with a letter begging me to stop, insisting it was tearing the family apart. I ignored them both. Instead, I asked Cynthia to file a Freedom of Information request to access all state facility audits conducted during my stay. The documents came in brown envelopes with stamps and redacted names, but buried in them were complaints, real ones, from staff members who had tried to raise concerns and had been silenced or let go. Karen had signed several terminations herself. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who had been warehoused here while their families lived their lives outside. I sat with Ben that night, one of the other residents who'd been here during those years. He was 89, barely spoke. But when I showed him a photo of the C-Wing room, he said one word: locked. "Do you remember who put you there?" I asked. He nodded. Blonde. Smelled like perfume. Karen. My hands clenched so tight I felt my nails digging into my palm. Thought I had already processed the betrayal. But this was deeper. This was cruelty with a smile. Carla told me Karen used to walk through the halls during her visits acting like she was the facility's savior, handing out toothbrushes and lotions like favors, giving orders, reprimanding nurses, talking to residents, like children, and then going home to my house. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I wrote a report, attached the testimonies, and signed it. Clearwater Grove wasn't going to be a place of silence anymore. When the inspector called me personally to thank me for my transparency, she said, "It's rare to find someone who turns their own experience into reform. Most just want to sue." I replied, "I'm not here to sue. I'm here to make sure nobody ends up in a locked room because they don't have a voice." The next board meeting was held in the main lounge instead of the conference room. I made sure every resident could attend if they wanted. Karen tried to show up. She wasn't on the guest list. Security stopped her at the door. I watched from inside as she argued with the receptionist, then stormed out to her car, slamming the door hard enough to shake the windows. Later that night, Michael called again. This time, I answered. His voice was quieter. "Mom, please. Karen didn't mean for any of this to happen. She ran a care facility like it was a kennel. You don't know everything." "I know enough." He paused. "She's pregnant." I closed my eyes. "You think that changes what she did?" "No," he said. "But maybe it should change what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything, Michael. I'm fixing what she broke. Then fix it without destroying our lives." That's when I said it. "You destroyed your own life the moment you signed me away." He didn't respond. I ended the call. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of my room, not a cell, not a locked ward, and watched the trees sway outside. I wasn't angry. I was alert, sharpened. They had underestimated me, but the fight wasn't over. They still had something I wanted back, and I was going to get it. On my terms. The day Karen came back, she wasn't angry. She was calculated. It had been 4 weeks since I took back my house. 3 since the state launched the internal audit of Clearwater Grove based on the reports I filed. 2 since her TikTok following vanished after one of her videos was flagged for misinformation. And 1 since Michael stopped calling altogether. So, when Carla knocked on my door and said, "She's in the lobby with flowers," I didn't react. "Should I send her away?" Carla asked. "No," I said. "Let her in." A few minutes later, Karen stepped into my room holding a bouquet of pink lilies and a paper gift bag. She looked thin, tired. Her makeup was lighter, but her tone was the same. "Barbara," she said softly. "I came to apologize." I sat on the edge of my bed. "No need. I've heard it all already. I mean it this time." "I doubt that." She stood there for a second, then sat across from me without being invited. She placed the gift bag on the nightstand and the flowers on the table. "I'm pregnant," she said. "I thought maybe you'd like to be part of the baby's life." I stared at her, not in anger, in analysis. "Is that why you're here?" I asked. "To offer me conditional forgiveness in exchange for playing grandma again?" "I'm here because I miss this family. There was never a family between us. only opportunity. Her eyes narrowed for a second, then softened again. Look, I made mistakes. But you've made this into a war, and I'm trying to end it. I stood. You forged documents. You isolated me. You stole my home. And you tried to break me by putting me away like expired food in the back of a fridge. I don't care if you're pregnant. That child doesn't erase what you did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? Karen looked down. I don't know. Maybe peace. We stood there in silence. Then she added, Michael's not doing well. He's not sleeping. He lost his job. Actions have consequences. She looked up. Don't you care? I walked to the window and pulled the blinds halfway. I cared. For 30 years. I paid the bills. I watched your marriage fall apart and helped hold it together. And I forgave more than you know. Now, I care about these women in this building. And about myself. Karen stood. So you're cutting us off completely? I already did. She picked up the flowers. I'll go. But at the door, she turned around and said, I don't think you're doing this because of justice. I think you're doing it because you're lonely. I nodded slowly. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather be lonely and safe than surrounded by people who smile while planning to disappear me. She left. I never saw her again. Michael never called again. But Ben kept visiting, every Sunday. He'd bring donuts and sit with me while we watched old westerns on the common room TV. He didn't ask for anything, didn't try to explain his parents. He just showed up, which was more than they ever did. 6 months after Karen left, Clearwater Grove launched the Second Voice Archive publicly, with full consent and participation from residents. We created short videos of their stories, printed booklets for their families, and even held a community open house where staff and residents met visitors face-to-face. Attendance tripled. 1. Resident reconnected with a niece she hadn't spoken to in 12 years. Another received a handwritten letter from her daughter for the first time in a decade. Not every story ended with hugs, but they ended with truth. I eventually stepped down from operational oversight. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to live like the women I had helped. In control of my choices, Carla was promoted to director. The C Wing was transformed into an arts and crafts center. My old room became a shared reading space, open to all. And me? I moved into the suite downstairs. No title, no pressure, just Barbara Randall, resident, reader, grandma to whoever needed one. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo. It was the front of my house, freshly painted with a for sale sign on the lawn. Taped to the back was a post-it note. Thought you'd want to know. We're finally out for good. Don't worry. The baby won't hear your name. Kay. I folded the photo and threw it away. Not out of anger, out of peace. Because some endings don't need witnesses. They just need to stay ended. I turned off the light and went to the courtyard for my walk. Ruth waved from the bench. Dolores was feeding the birds, and a new resident, Anna, just moved in last week, was crying silently by the fountain. I sat beside her and handed her a tissue. They told me my daughter would visit, she whispered. Nodded. Mine said the same, and we sat there together, quietly, alive, exactly where we were supposed to be.